Well, I'd like to call this meeting of the Mayor's Neighborhood Safety Task Force to order. I think instead of calling roll, we'll just go around and introduce ourselves and the organization that you represent. We'll start down here.
Hi, I'm Esther Papp, and I'm here representing the Champaign-Urbana Tenant Union.
Yeah, Norma Linton representing WUNA.
And make sure you
West
speak into
Urbana.
the microphone. Okay.
West Urbana Neighborhood Association. Sorry, I have a little bit of laryngitis.
Okay.
Kathy Wallig from the Southeast Urbana Neighborhood Association.
Teresa Michelson from SUNA also.
Oh, Tammy Masters from the Country Squire Edition Neighborhood Watch.
And I'm Diane Marlin, Mayor.
Frankie Johnson from the Youth Council Committee.
Okay. Is anyone here from LNAC? Come on up.
So much for sneaking in.
You can't sneak in.
You get to represent.
Right there. This is Reverend Keith Harris from the Learman Neighborhood Action Committee. We have staff members here. Would you like to introduce yourselves in the audience?
John Schneider, Community Development Director.
Joel Sanders, Lieutenant with the Police Department.
Carol Mitten, City Administrator.
Brian Seraphin, Deputy Chief of Police.
And then supporting staff over here are Kate Levy, who's the Administrative Assistant to our office, and then Scott Tess from Public Works. Next item of business is the approval of minutes from the previous meeting. Is there a motion for approval?
I
so
just
moved.
found one. It's like a typo. Is
Okay,
that
let's move it and second it,
Okay.
and then you can,
I'll-
we'll ask for
Right.
corrections.
Move approval.
Okay. Moved by Esther. Did I hear, Kathy, did you second? Did I hear something?
Nobody can, I
Okay,
second.
all right. Okay, and Teresa, you had a correction?
it's under discussion topics on that first page there. It's the very last line. Requested that the community continue to, the word be is observant. B is missing.
Okay. To be observant to things happening in their neighborhoods.
Right.
Okay, any other corrections? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, they're approved. We are following the agendas for open meetings, which is why we have this set agenda here. So is there any input from members of the public? Okay. We don't have any presentations scheduled for tonight. So the discussion topics that we have on the agenda are mostly related to the management and maintenance of rental properties, and this is related to questions and suggestions that have come in from task force members over the past couple of weeks. So before we get into this, I want to point out what people have as handouts on, you should have handouts. One is entitled Procedural History of the City of Urbana versus Platinum Group Properties. This is a pretty detailed outline of the experience of the city with this particular company. There's a very detailed overview of the Aggravated Public Nuisance Ordinance, and we'll discuss each of these as we go through the meeting, but this is just background information for you. There's a sheet that has a map with red outline on it. That is detailing ownership, the current ownership of specific rental properties in the Silver Water area. And then the fourth sheet is the process for legal review of failure to comply tickets. In other words, how a failure to comply case works its way through the court if it gets that far. So there should be 4 different pieces of background information for you. Okay, so we've broken down these topics into several different areas, and then staff members will be discussing each one, if that's okay. That's how okay to proceed that way. And then feel free to ask questions. And this is pretty informal. Yes.
This information that you were talking about a little while ago, is that something that we should have?
We can get copies for you. Yeah, we have copies up here. And Clyde Walker joined us from LNAC. Hi, Clyde. And Megan McGinty is joining us from, come on up. And your organization? Okay. To be formed. Northwest Urbana. Okay. Okay, one of the questions that people had were the changes in ownerships in key properties in the Silverwater area, as well as an update on the Town and Aspen Court, and then we wanted to give you a little bit of an update on what's happening at Town and Country Apartments, which hasn't been on the radar in the past, but it is now. Yeah, and so that would be John and Joel. So John Schneider from Community Development and Joel Sanders from the Police Department.
As you likely know, we do systematic inspections of rental properties throughout the city. Our staff just recently completed the first, I think the last few zones. The program started in 2007, and we just completed the last few zones, and now we're starting in our second round. We had anticipated, our goal was to have it done in 5 years, but because of staff changes, there were complications associated with people who were like single one-off owners. When you work with the property owners regularly, they understand what to expect, so it took a little bit more staff time to get that accomplished. But Town and Country Apartments, the systematic inspection of all of the units was completed and cleared on May 24th. So we started our process. There's a number of buildings out there. We started our process in December and cited all the code violations and got those all cleared by May 24th. We are working with the owner. We discovered that they replaced a number of windows without permits, and so given what's going on there and their recent ownership purchase of the property, we have an agreement with them to replace. There is over 100, I think it's 124 windows that need to be replaced in order to meet the minimum egress requirements. And so we entered an agreement with them. They have a certain time period, 18 months, to get the entire complex completely in compliance with code. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joel and talk about what the police activity's been.
So as I look at statistics, pretty much all of the complexes that we've had problems with in the past are on a stable or downward trend, except Town and Country. And they have, since 2013, they have their calls for service have been markedly going up. We've been working with the owner, who's in Colorado, and local management to make changes and to make sure they're aware of what's going on there. And they've made they've made management changes. They've taken some steps to secure their buildings. They're talking about putting in, we're working on a timeline to get them to put in cameras. So they're taking some steps to try and change the direction that it's going. But currently they are on an upward trend.
Esther?
Police always talk about calls for service, which I know is really important in terms of police staffing and whatnot. For the public, we don't care how many times people call the police. We care about how many crimes. What is the situation there with regard to actual crimes, and what kind of crimes are people reporting?
So I don't have that exact number in front of me. I will say that the calls for service were for everything except follow-up and traffic stops. Anecdotally, we're going up there not for the minor crimes, but we've had some significant crimes up there.
Like gun violence?
Yes.
Okay. Drug dealing?
Yes.
I assume domestic battery because it's...
Yeah, the city can't really evaluate on domestic batteries as far as the aggravated public nuisance.
Oh, I'm
is
not talking about
concerned.
aggravated public
Yeah.
nuisance. I'm just talking about when we hear there's
yeah.
a big problem.
Yes, so the
I'm talking about from a
domestics-
human, if I were
yes.
to think of living there,
Okay.
what's going on in town and country that I
d-
should be afraid?
Domestics are one of the things that's going on up there.
And is it some drug I mean, is drug activity what you see as the center of the problem, or?
I don't know that I can say what the center of the problem is. There's probably multiple different issues where they've maybe brought in some individuals who aren't law-abiding, and they've not taken steps in the past. One of the reasons their management gave me was that one of the reasons they let go of their manager who was there was they weren't following their Monarch Investments policies on who to admit, give a lease to, and who not to. So they weren't following their own policies and were leasing to individuals who didn't fit their criteria.
And so what crimes are being, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to give you a hard time, but I watch the city council meetings too, and I don't think the police realize, when you talk about you wish people would understand more what you do.
Sure.
We try desperately to understand, but we never get the information that we need to understand it. Like, I mean, I guess, you know, like, I mean, you can go look at the crime map, and it gives you a window of time, but like, in the course of a year, how many crimes, you know, there's 640 apartments out there, how many crimes, and what is the breakdown of what the different crimes? Like we say, people who don't follow the law, could you give me examples of 3 ways they don't follow the law, just so I can understand better what's going on there? You know,
Let me come
Yeah,
backwards
okay,
on
yeah.
it. Those are answers I can get for you. I don't have them in front of
Right,
me.
oh, okay.
And I've learned not to speculate
Yes,
while I
yes,
sit
yes,
here. I can tell you that there has been a lot of domestics up there. There has been incidents of drug dealing, and there have been incidents of gun violence in that complex.
okay. If we could get just like a little breakdown about that, because it is the largest apartment complex in Urbana. I mean, when you look at what's actually complex, and it is, I mean, frankly, I hear from people, oh, town and country isn't good anymore because they have a lot of black people. And I realize that that's not what you're saying, but that's, you know, that's out there in the street, and that's just, I just find that offensive, and to me, that's not a reason to make a place less desirable. If there's, you know, significant crime, though, that's something, you know, maybe people should know about, but just, you know, what it is and how it breaks down would be, and it would be helpful to me in terms of understanding. I'm not going to decide not to refer people there, but just when people say it, whether I tell them, no, that's, you know, really you're just going on rumor, or, hey, go check the crime map because you'll see. That would be helpful to me to have that information.
Sure. I will, I guess through the mayor's office, I can
Yeah.
get those answers for you.
Okay. Teresa?
And this change has really been caused by the management, right? I mean, or it was sold in 2013, was it?
I'm not comfortable saying it was caused by the management. I can say that Monarch bought it in 2013.
Okay.
And at the same time, we started seeing an
Seeing
upward trend.
stuff going down.
So
Okay.
you can draw your own conclusions.
Megan?
I am drawing a blank on exactly where Town and Country is. It's one of those, I have a vague idea. Could you?
Sure. Go up
just-
Cunningham.
And how many units it is?
Go up to Cunningham and go back east on Kerr, or go past the old El Toro is Oakland, and go back east there. It sits back up by Northgate to the north, where the old Kroger, what's the word?
It was Eagle Store.
Eagle Store, not Kroger. They have, Town and Country is 662 units.
So it's
So it's the by
largest
far,
complex in Urbana.
it's the largest complex that's in Urbana.
Esther, real fast, to speak to one of yours, I don't know if you have this with you. I know that calls for service aren't maybe the ultimate scientific stat, but I will show out. that
Hey,
it-
Bryant, can you
Wanna
speak
step
into
on
the
here, sir?
microphone?
Oh, there's a microphone. Hope they can hear me. Hello, huh? Better? Is this? Town and Country has 662 units. In 2013, they had 178 calls for service at that particular property. And our crime analysis person, she went ahead and pulled out certain things like traffic crashes, foot patrols, and there was one other variable. 178. The next year, 324. Then 293. Then 346. Then last year, in 2017, 552 calls for service. So I can't, as Joel said, give you exactly a breakdown, but you can just sort of get a sense for how often the police then are heading up there. It's not an exact science, but she's kind of tried to extrapolate the last few years, multiplied by this, and done some of that, and we're on pace for 688. So 4 years ago, 178, and now 5 years later, we're looking at 688 as her estimate for this year. So just maybe help flesh that out a little bit.
So public safety and community development have been spending a lot of time up there in recent months. So. Okay. Anything else to report on any other areas, John? Or questions?
I have one quick question, and it's probably more of a John question. Do you notice the decrease, the living conditions, have they deteriorated as well?
At Town and Country?
Yes.
I don't do the inspections myself, but so I can't speak to that, but I do know that they've, our goal is always compliance with the code, and, all they have to do for compliance, people just need to meet minimum compliance standards, code compliance standards. And like I said, as of May 24th, all the units were verified to be in compliance. So, when you're dealing with different tenants and different communities and different property owners and different types of properties, it's hard to say, because that's more one person's opinion, and another person's opinion might be different. So that's more of an opinion type of.
But you haven't
observation.
Recorded more complaints from tenants in that area?
I can't say specifically, but to my recollection, no.
Okay, thank you.
Our inspection was based on the systematic. It just came time to do that inspection at that site.
I have one more comment. This is very helpful. However, 2014 and 2016 have been sold. I believe Illini Group bought them.
Well, this is based on the property information we have in our GIS database. So if that sale hasn't been recorded at the county and hasn't come over to our property records, then that's probably why. But what are
Okay.
those addresses? I can verify that with the name.
2014 and 2016 South Botter.
Botter. And I had heard they had sold, and I actually asked Nick about that one, and he said to his knowledge, they hadn't sold yet. So it might be, they might have a sales agreement, but they might not have closed yet. So until they close and it gets recorded at the recorder's office and it goes to the, through the whole process of recording the deed, then we won't know about it.
The tenants were advised about 6 or 8 weeks ago.
Mhm.
Illini Group.
John, so this says since January 2017, this is update. Is it possible to get a January 2018?
I think I'd have to check with Nick on this. He might have meant January 2018.
Okay.
I'll verify that, and if it needs, we'll send an updated list to the group.
Esther?
I just want to say one thing in response to Kathy. What a tenant union, we're not hearing, I mean, there's so many places, including on that list, of where people keep calling about repair problems, and actually Town and Country, we're not hearing a lot out of that either. I haven't been, this is what we about crime, I haven't heard anything specific about crime. I hear people say, well, they don't think it's so safe out there because they see sketchy people. But when I ask, what are they doing or what's happening, then, so people, they go back to I just stick to myself, so, which always makes me think drug dealing is what people usually, when they talk about staying to themselves. But I'm just curious what's going out there, because there's definitely, your numbers for the calls for service definitely show it, but I don't know, and I hear from a fair number of people, and I don't know what's actually happening, so that's why I was asking.
That's a fair question.
Okay. Any update on Aspen Court?
Sure. We recently issued the building permit for the complete renovation of Aspen Court. I think I've told this group before the value of the renovation is like $5.2 million. So it's going to be completely, they're not going to completely gut renovation per se, but they're going to do updates and upgrades of the wiring and plumbing and things of that nature. They're also going to construct some accessible units that, as the way this project's funded, they have to be in compliance with Section 504. It's a federal regulation that requires a certain percentage of the units to be accessible. So they just, my understanding, I talked to Kelly today, they just started the interior demolition work, removal of cabinets and things like that or whatever. So that project is underway. And I think it's about an 18-month timeline. It might be shorter than that to get completion.
Esther?
I'm sorry, the question, lady. How many, do you have an idea how many people are still living out there?
No, I think do you know?
Yeah, I actually had an opportunity today to go out and talk to the young lady who runs it from Indianapolis, Chastity, and there's 24 occupied apartments. I don't know the number of actual individuals in each apartment, but there are 24 apartments out there that are still occupied of the 140, so it's pretty much vacant. We walked the whole thing today. They have started, there were construction trailers out there. They've actually started construction on the east side of Ivanhoe Way, right there where the road's been closed off. She said that there was a building schedule, but she was hesitant to hold them to that, only because they're not sure what they're going to find once they start getting into the guts of the building.
And sort of related to this, John, that prompted another question. 48 of those 140 units had a HUD
Public
subsidy, like not through the Housing Authority, it's straight from HUD. The new owners, I thought, were going to keep that, aren't they?
I believe they are. I think that what they're going to do, my understanding of what they're going to do is they're going to work with the 24 people that are remaining. When they get new units, when they get the units rehabbed and occupiable, they're going to move those people into those units and then begin to fill them up after that.
Okay.
So my understanding is, I can't remember the section, it's 202.
202, I think it
202,
was,
yeah. My understanding is that through whatever process, through attrition or whatever, that now I believe they've still maintained those 48 units, so.
Yeah, I'm just surprised that there aren't 48 people left, that
Yeah.
someone that gave those up, but I guess if they did, they did, yeah.
Any other questions on this? Okay. We had questions come up about the Platinum Group property fine, the schedule for payment of that, consequences if it's not paid, and a question about why was one apartment at 1401 Silver allowed to be reoccupied. So you do have the 3-page brief from Michelle, which outlines the history of it, but bottom line, in November of 2017, November 2nd, the court fined Platinum Group $45,000 for violations, and he was given 1 year to pay the fine. And then, John, do you want to add anything?
I
to
can
that?
just add, the question specifically was why were they allowed to rent those units? And the property is allowed to be registered. The code says that if a property owner, if there are no outstanding fees or sums owed to the city, and I'm paraphrasing that, the very last paragraph, Michelle described, kind of gives a description, but technically until those fees are outstanding, we can't not register their property. So until November 2nd, as long as they're paid by November 2nd, they would no longer be outstanding. But as of the, November 2nd, if they're not paid on November 3rd, they would be outstanding, and things would change at that point.
Okay. You have a question?
I think what I really need is an attorney to answer this question, because I don't understand why a judge is allowed to violate our ordinance that says he has to be paid and up to date. So why does a judge get to sit on Main Street and tell us, or tell Mr. Zaruki he can violate our ordinance?
Yeah, I don't think the judge told him he could violate the ordinance. The judgment was made. It went through the appeals process. The appeals court sent it back to the local court. The local court basically changed the fine at the advice and the behest of the appeals court, and set the fine at what it is now, and then they have so much time to pay it, and that's that.
No,
The courts have
I
that
went to those
ability.
hearings. I'm really familiar
Yeah, no, and I
with
know
what's
you were
gone
there,
on.
and I think you could, I think you could talk to one of our legal staff, but they would give you the same answer. The courts have a lot more power than our local ordinances do.
Well, by golly, we're going to change it.
Good luck with that.
So just a question then, so if this fine is not forthcoming November 2nd, and given history, it seems kind of strange, so that it would be, what happens then? There's still a whole nother legal rigmarole in order to...
Well, there would be outstanding monies owed to the city, and at that point, we wouldn't allow them to register their properties. Any owner that has outstanding fees, our code says that we can not register that owner.
So his rental registration would be pulled for...
Well, rental registration, it's not due until, typically we send out the bill on October 15th, and because of our transition to the Citizen Serve cloud-based software, last year we made it, gave them a couple months to send their money in. This time it's going to be, I believe it's going to be December 1st. So it's right around the time when we would renew, so.
So he won't be able to renew if it's not paid.
That's correct. We'd still have to follow a legal process, but that goes with the, according to the code, that goes with any property in Urbana.
So can we double-check his status November the 3rd
Sure.
instead of waiting for software to kick him out?
Well, clarify, we're not waiting for software.
Well,
It
if you're
would
sending a
be-
bill October the 15th and giving people until December the 1st, yeah, you are waiting
No,
for
that's when the
software.
bill becomes due, but he has until November 1st or November 2nd to pay it.
We'll know on November 2nd if he's paid this fine or not, and then take it from there. But we also then, the other major thing to keep in mind is the people living in the apartments have to have a place to live, and that's
Right.
what we ran into last time. Keith and then Esther.
Is there a certain amount that they're fined if they don't have it paid by the 2nd?
That's a question for legal. I think there might be a daily fine, but it's a judgment that the judge passed down, so that would be up to the courts, I believe.
We can find something out. Esther, you have a question?
Yeah, well, this is about the pulling rental registration, and I understand, when this was first created, the idea of, that was about 5 years ago, the idea was that the city didn't want to fine, they didn't want to take landlords to court, because, I guess they think it's so much more trouble than taking average citizens to court, which they do all the time. I mean, this is for not paying fines. And so the idea was that they'll pay the fine to not lose their rental registration. And I don't want to make people homeless either, but I'm looking at the last list of failure to comply violations that was given to the city council in the quarterly reports, and I see one place from 2014, the case is still open, and two that were fined in 2015, and their cases, well, one of them, it's corrected, but there's a notice of a delinquent fine that was sent on March 2nd, 2016. That's over 2 years ago. And then the other one that set up a payment agreement. From 2016, there were it was 3 different properties and 5 different tickets. And then last year, 2017, there were 6 different properties, got 7 tickets. And I'm just wondering, it appears from this that there are still open violations. There's the other side of it, like you want to make people homeless, but is someone who filed a complaint with the city for an inspection back in 2016 still living with the code violations and the landlord is still not being prosecuted by the city? Or are all of these cases in court? Or I'm just curious, have they been, I don't think they've been denied their rental registration, but I guess that's what I'm asking is, are they either in court or were denied the rental registration, or are y'all still waiting on their payment?
Well, the properties, some of the properties you alluded to, some of them are vacant. Actually, most of the ones on this list are vacant, so revoking their rental registration, would be kind of, they don't want to register because they're vacant properties. To answer your question about the code violations, as an example, it's 1306 East Silver. We basically, if they don't come into compliance, we require them to be vacated. So 6 of the 12 units there are not approved for occupancy.
Okay.
And when they come back into compliance, we allow them to reoccupy. But but that one's under a payment agreement. And I think 1002 East Florida, we just missed that one on, that's also under the similar payment agreement. But many of these, 101, number 101, 135, 136, 139, 210, 212, 214, 215 are all properties.
At which address?
I'm looking at the you're looking at the list, I'm looking at the PM number, the,
Oh.
those are all vacant properties. So they don't apply for re-registration because they're vacant and either on the market to sell or they just, and Michelle provided a explanation of the process. That was a printout of the process of how they're
Right.
adjudicated. And we follow the code. Our staff goes out, does an inspection, and if they don't bring, we have those three different levels for failure to comply, and if they don't bring it into compliance in the time period, and it says that there's part of the code that says that the code official is allowed to extend time for due cause. As an example, if a tenant won't let the property owner in, and I mean, you have this experience, and we talked to Mick a lot about this. And we appreciate, we have a great working relationship with Mick. He's very helpful in explaining, because sometimes the tenants come to us and they don't understand, they go to Mick, and, and he's able to get them to understand. So that helps out a lot. So with the ones with ongoing code violations, we make sure that those are mitigated, or we won't allow them to remain occupied.
So, well, actually, I went by a couple of these properties, and they kind of looked occupied. That's what prompted me to do this. But to the best of your knowledge, then you would say, for example, the house at 1007 East Washington is not occupied.
Correct.
And you won't let it be occupied.
Correct.
And the same thing with 1002 Florida. 401 Michigan?
401 Michigan.
Yeah, there's a house on the south side of the street opposite because that was from 2017, but those fines were due a little over a year ago, and it says it's open. And then I was surprised to see
I'm not sure what
several-
list you're looking at. I don't
I'm
have a
looking
full-
at the failure to comply violations list that was passed out, that was part of the city council packet
August
in May.
20th?
The date didn't print out on this, but I
Okay,
think.
so the most recent one, there's no 401 Michigan on there.
Okay, oh, that's, all right, so that's good to me. How about
And
the
actually,
Crystal Lake?
I can tell you about 401
Yeah.
Michigan. That was a property that had gone into foreclosure. We actually made the lady move out of that house. She was owner occupied. It went into foreclosure. It was foreclosed on by the bank. The bank sold it, and the guy that purchased it, bought it, is rehabbing it. It's actually, I think it's almost complete, and I think that's why that was removed from there. So in some cases, people just leave their properties, and you might have a vacant property with no recourse. We had one that my understanding was that the owner was in prison, so the hope of getting any court action or judgment for funds out of that is pretty limited.
So you did not have to deny them rental registration because they just didn't
Right.
apply.
They didn't apply.
You haven't placarded it because you didn't declare it unfit for habitation because it's not. But if a tenant were to move into one of these such properties and then report to the city that it was rented when it hasn't been registered, then you would do something about the owner having rented it without having registration.
Well, what we do in situations like this where we have an outstanding ticket, when a property becomes vacated, our staff goes out and puts a not approved for occupancy sticker right on the front door. So that way, we call it a red ball.
You mean
but
even if you haven't declared it unfit, just because?
well, if that means there's outstanding code violations.
Right, but a lot of places
And
have
then-
outstanding code violations. that
Right,
aren't.
and we haven't, it's not to the extreme, but if somebody, we're talking the same language, I don't think everybody understands. There are certain code
Right.
conditions that our staff would go in and say, this is not approved for occupancy, nobody can live here, you have to move out. But in this case, we can determine that the code violations exist, and basically, once they deoccupy it, then it's not approved for occupancy because the owner has to mitigate those code violations before we will approve it.
So you do put the notice up on the building?
Correct.
So
And we
someone
send them a
so the landlord would
notice.
have to tear it down in order to
Right.
rent it? All right, that's
Right.
really good to know. Thank you. I
Right.
did not know you did that because I thought there was some legal hang-up. Just since you had the list, if I could just ask, the Crystal Lake, I was very surprised to see 3 on Crystal Lake Drive, although I think I know why you have so many there because I think they just were more inclined to report. But are those cleared? That was from 2017. 208, 212, and 203 East Crystal Lake Drive were all on there.
I think you have an older list.
Okay.
I have 203, this is the most recent list. 203 that's vacant, and those have not been cleared, and those
Okay.
likely, if you drive by there, have a red ball on the front door. I think they
Okay,
do.
all right, I didn't check those yet.
For 508, that has not, this has been a really difficult one. It's noticed over there, it says corrected, so they had a delinquent fine, but we have ongoing I think you're familiar with that address. We have ongoing issues with that. Now there's one unit in there that has a not approved for occupancy on it. And then if you look down at the bottom, actually more recently, we have several properties that have, they pay within the time, they pay their fine, so.
Okay,
and
one
I
last
think- I
question.
think you recognize
707
that property.
Illinois, because that's in my neighborhood, that's what I'm asking. That's, and that one, that was, the fine was in January, and I wouldn't be surprised because of the location if it turned over, but I'm just wondering if there are new people moving in.
707 West Illinois, actually, I think they're in the process of working on that. I could find out about that. But at 707 West Illinois, the owners recently sold it. They had hired a property management company that they had several properties, and they really didn't do according to the owner, a really good job of managing, and it ended up costing them money. They weren't taking care of the property. They didn't even know these tickets exist. Well, on that one, my understanding was that we've contacted the new owner, and they said that the payment was included in the escrow. We just hadn't received the check from the bank yet, so we're in that process. So again, it's one of those closing issues.
Thank you. My biggest concern is people living with code violations.
Yeah, no.
And the system doesn't always work for them because you can't make the landlord do it. But the landlord shouldn't be, the landlord shouldn't be being able to legally rent someplace with 23 violations for an entire year and then be able to, rent it to someone else when those people leave. And that, which is what the whole fining thing was supposed to prevent that kind of stuff from happening. So you feel generally it does prevent it?
Yeah, I think our staff does a really good job of ensuring compliance. That's why, if I ask my guys, what are we looking for, they say compliance. That's all, we talk to the property owners and say, we're not, as Kathy, we're looking for compliance.
Right.
And we make sure that the tenant is protected and to make sure that the code violations are mitigated, or we keep going back and writing more tickets.
Yes, and I attest to the fact. Yes, you do. You always have the actual code enforcement part. What the inspectors do has never been a problem in the city of Urbana. In fact, I think it's always been stellar. It's with the landlords who fight, and then whether it's supposed to go to legal or that's where things sometimes disintegrate. In the meantime, there's still people involved in it. And as my opinion, I realize I have a biased opinion since Mayor Marlin and I were the ones who sort of promoted this idea to start with. But I think the fine, the possibility of a fine, works to motivate landlords to hustle to meet the deadline. I think they take the deadline. Just comparing Urbana and Champaign, I think the potential of a fine gets them to take your folks more seriously. And I don't know if that's your perception, but that's mine.
Yeah, I think my perception, I think really most of the property owners that we work with work hard to bring their properties into compliance and meet the timelines and stuff like that. And typically if they don't, that's why this list isn't, could be 20 pages if we had other issues, but if they're not able to meet their deadline, they contact our inspectors and they provide, reasons. They might not be able to get materials, the weather might be the wrong time to replace windows and things like that. So we try to work in a positive way with the property owners and productive way to make sure that there's a safe and sanitary place for the tenants as well.
It might be useful in the future to indicate which are vacant properties. Would it be too much trouble to?
We can add another
column?
We can add another column.
It's actually really useful information. And then the other thing, it's always a good time to remind folks that the city can't find out about violations unless people are willing to call us and tell us, and unless it's through systematic inspections. But it doesn't do any good to complain to your neighbor or complain to the guy across the street. If you've got a serious issue in your apartment and you're not, the first thing you do is you call your landlord and report it to your landlord. I've been a landlord for 40 years, and I can't tell you how many times we find out on August 15th when the tenants move out that the sink is leaking or the smoke detector isn't working or there's some issue, because people, for whatever reason, do not think to call their landlord. So you should call your landlord as the first recourse, and if you don't get satisfaction, then you can, file a complaint here. But first recourse should be call the landlord. Most people want to keep their properties in decent condition and prevent problems from getting worse. Yeah.
One point to that.
Unless the landlord happens to be some of our more recalcitrant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right, tenants, we talk about protecting tenants, they're afraid.
Yes.
They're very much afraid. And somehow we need to work on that.
I
And
agree.
I don't know what
I
the
agree.
answer is, but we need to work on that.
I agree. Any other comments or questions on this topic? Thanks, John. This
Thank you.
was very clear.
If you don't mind, to the last point you made, we do get tenants to call, and after they put up with something for a very long time, and so what we tried hard to do is get out. If you have ideas on how we can get the information out for the number for people to call, 384-2443, and we will process that complaint. That's the phone number, building safety. The other thing is, if you notice things going on in your neighborhood, we do have an online portal that we're going to put basically a push-button link to it here in the coming weeks, that you can file a complaint through the online portal, and you'll be able to either file it anonymously, or you'll be able to, if you want return information, we ask that you give us some of your information back. So that helps us, especially if you see a vacant house. And a lot of times if you see a vacant house in your neighborhood, we'd like for you to call us and let us know that it's vacant if it doesn't have a for sale sign on it, because the longer they sit, the more difficult it is to get you know, an owner motivated in doing something with it. So the more information we have from the public, you know, that helps us out.
And one thing that's been going on the last couple of years is Lieutenant Sanders has been meeting with the property owners in the Silver Water area on a regular basis, and that's actually helped a lot in, number one, getting landlords together, the property owners together in one room, and just to know each other and keep an eye on things. Yeah.
What's that phone number again?
217-384-2443. So, you're welcome.
Okay. A couple of questions came in about the aggravated public nuisance ordinance and how it's used. We did ask Michelle to write up a very comprehensive description of the ordinance, and this group actually, years and years ago, one of the first things we did is we provided input on this, on language for this ordinance, and it's been one of the most, I think, one of the most useful tools the city's developed. It's not officially applied very often, but it's often used as a potential, and that's helped a lot. And Joel, do you want to, or Brian probably can give some insights on how public safety uses that when dealing with problem properties.
Sure. It's a very good tool that has not been officially used except for maybe twice. And by officially used, as you look through the 3-page explanation of it, there's steps we have to take before the city can take a property owner to court under the ordinance. So the procedure and the way this has worked and the way this has been very effective is typically either through, most often my officers will be coming in saying, hey, we're going to this such and such address on a regular basis, or an address that we've identified as starting to become a problem. And I will just figure out who the owner is. I'll call the owner and say, hey, let's sit down and talk about what's going on at your property. And we'll start talking through ways to improve that property. Many times an owner, especially if it's a residence, rental residence, they don't even know there's been a problem. So I've had several owners who will come to me, I'll call and say there's a problem, and they'll actually thank us for letting them know, and they'll take care of it. So we start that process. Every now and then we'll have whether it's a tavern or a apartment or a liquor store or something like that, we need to work a little bit more aggressively with them. But like I said, with the exception of 2 properties, the city's never had to actually file and start moving forward with trying to get them cleaned up. So we get compliance from the property owners pretty readily. Yes.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but what happened with Town and Country?
So once we identified that it was a problem, we started talking to them. And again, once we start talking, the ordinance gives them the ability to take reasonable steps to improve. So if I go to a property manager or property owner and say, we've identified this problem, and the owner or manager says, I've taken X step, I've got to give the time for that step to either show improvement or not show improvement. So it takes a while. And so we started talking to them. They agreed to take some steps and do some things. So we continued to monitor it. When it wasn't improving, we went back, and at this point, two managers, representatives from the company, actually flew in from Colorado to talk to us. We then got assurance from them that things would improve, and they gave us a list of steps they would take. When it still didn't improve, we then said, we're going to ramp this up. At that point, they fired the manager, brought in new management. So now they've taken another reasonable step to get it to improve. So we had to, again, just continue. If we'd taken them in front of a judge, the judge would say they're taking steps. So we've got them to agree to secure the buildings. We've got them to agree to put in cameras and take some other steps. And all we can do is continue to monitor it before we can actually use the aggravated public nuisance against them.
Megan?
And what kind of timeline would that be? When was the new management hired? And what kind of timeline do they have to complete these?
I can't give you a date off the top of my head. It was recently. I can tell you that I am in continued contact with the management in Colorado. I'm dealing directly with them. And at the end of this month, I'm going to run stats again to see where they're at and see if they've leveled off or if they started to come down. They could start to come down, and it'll take them a while to get to an acceptable level.
Esther?
I'm sorry, I'm just going to ask, because a lot of landlords were against this ordinance, and I think with a very justified reason, and that's because they aren't causing the crime. They're victims of the crime just like the tenants. Why do we blame, Town and Country has lots of crime, so it must be a problem with the management. So that always begs the question, what is it you ask management to do for, you mentioned about putting in security cameras, which doesn't prevent crime, but helps you catch, in big picture it does, because it helps you catch criminals. What
Sure.
else? What other kind of things? Just name 3 other things, maybe.
Sure, well, you bring up a lot of the same arguments when I first meet with a landlord. They say the same thing. What am I supposed to do?
Right. So what should they do?
So they've got leases that they need to enforce. A lot of times, like with, not to pick on Town and Country, but that was one of the things they weren't doing, was enforcing their leases.
Like what kind of provision of the lease would they enforce? Just the no criminal activity one?
Well, one big one, and I don't know specifically Town and Country,
Yeah,
but I've seen in leases before, is if there's a subject who's banned from the property, if you permit them onto
Got it,
the
okay,
property,
got it.
you're in a lease violation. So if somebody's continually doing that and they're not then taking action against that renter, that's going to continue to be a problem. Loud music, again, that's another lease violation. They're not taking those actions. Some properties were not taking care of the environmental sections, letting trees or bushes overgrow, which
okay.
creates a problem. So these are things that they can do to mitigate the issue, regardless of who they have in their facility. We've asked for security guards before. We've asked.
Security plan, too.
Security plan, well, yeah, it's part of the security plan.
But
We've
you can
asked.
ask them to hire security guards?
We've asked. I can't say off the top of my head if we've ever made it, the city's made it a requirement, but we have asked. And we've gotten, Aspen Court did when we asked.
Fencing.
Fencing is another big one. That's one of the things that helped up with Hamilton on the park, was we asked for fencing, we asked for cameras. We asked them just to be aware, and a lot of times they're moving on with their business. They're looking at from dollars and cents. The dollars are coming in, it makes sense to them. And when we tell them there's a problem, sometimes that'll just get them to take a closer look.
And you also look at whether they have, whether they have an on-site office that's staffed, that actually has people in it during the day?
Yes.
Is that one thing you look at? Okay.
Yes.
Because that's at Hamilton on the Park, I think that was a big part of the problem was there was never anyone, I mean, I went over there and couldn't find people there during the day, yeah. Thanks.
Keith?
Sir, did you say that Aspen Court has a security person?
They did. I don't know that they still do. After the last the last homicide there, we got on the phone, and it was still owned by Green Street, and they then, in fact, let me stand corrected, before the last one, because their security was on site during the homicide, they hired security when things started escalating the last time there. I don't know that if they still, with only 24 units, I don't know if they still have security there or not.
I've seen someone come through there at least within a period of 3 weeks ago or something like that. So
Okay.
it's been at least
They
3
may,
weeks.
yeah, they may still have it.
But I think one of the things very interesting when it comes to this ordinance is the fact that once shown, once discussions are had, I've been surprised at the number of situations that do resolve prior to actually filing things and making a legal process out of it. I know that Lieutenant Bob Fitzgerald dealt many times with this issue before Joel inherited it and had a fairly decent batting average with regards to this is once we started bringing people on board and trying to gain that voluntary compliance. Not every time, but there are times when it, more often than not, it has worked.
Any other questions, comments?
I would just like to point out, we're talking big complexes here, but I know I had a problem property next door to my house. It was a duplex. And Lieutenant Fitzgerald was very effective in taking care of the prostitution, the drug dealing, and Lord knows what else was going on there. But we seem to be super rich in duplexes in this city. And, well, yeah, Southeast Urbana seems to have their fair share. So these are problems that are not just limited to the Aspen courts, the town and countries, which I know are prevalent, but they can happen anywhere.
My back pocket math real quick as I put this together is I could identify 38, since 2010, 38 different properties that we've addressed. Again, keep in mind, there's only been 2 that the city's taken any official action on. 10 to maybe 13 of those were private residents. Not wasn't owner occupied, but it was rental property. So yes, you're right. It's not just the town and countries and the Aspen courts.
It's every neighborhood. Almost
Yes.
2/3 of the households are rental in Urbana.
Yeah.
So it's every single neighborhood. So when people ask why does Urbana focus on this, it's because it's so much of our community. And it affects quality of life for tenants and for property owners in every block in this town. So, Clyde.
How much does toxic mold come up as an issue as far as complaints? That would have been for John. I'm sorry.
That would be a John question.
The reason I ask is because I had someone show me when they had a leak that they complained about. The leak got taken care of, but as far as they knew, the leak had been going on unobserved for a while and may have seeped onto the floor and into some of the tiles and might, I don't know if that would cause toxic mold or not.
Well, I could say that we require people to, make repairs if there's damage caused by water and things like that. We do not have the technical expertise to test. We don't have the lab access or any of that kind of stuff. We don't have the staff expertise to test for mold. But what we do is, if there's a leak in a wall or something like that, we require them to open it up, make sure that it's properly sealed, dried out and properly sealed, and then repaired from that point. So that's what we can do. A lot of times people, because of public information, a lot of times people think mildew might be toxic mold or whatever, but we don't have the expertise to identify that.
Well, when you brought up leaks in the walls sort of answered another question that I had, but it wasn't on my mind at the time, so thanks.
Well, Esther?
I was going to say, thank you, thank you, thank you, when I heard the words "open the wall," because there are many people in your position in other places who won't do that. And what landlords do, I don't think I'm giving away any secret, but bad landlords do is they just paint over the mold. Or they wipe it off with bleach, but then they paint over. And the mold is still there because mold has roots, and it's going to just come back. And I do tell tenants, we always say report these to the landlord, but if they told the landlord about the problem and they painted over mold, I always tell them call your office before they call the landlord again so that one of you guys will see it, but then if the landlord paints over, I mean, if you can see it, I hope that you tell them they have to open the wall. It sounds like that's what you do.
Well, yeah, and I think, if it looks like it's gone into the wall from the inspector's perspective, the other part of that is for tenants, if they've contacted the landlord, I always say that we're taking selfies and pictures of everything with our cell phones, and my bet is they can just take a picture of it. I mean, we can't identify mold, anyway, but at least if we can see a picture of what's going on at the time, that helps us out a lot.
But not to create any confusion, you cannot cite a violation based on their picture.
Right, but
right,
that
but
just
the
gives
picture will
us
inform
evidence
you.
of the process,
Right, yes, yeah.
that this is what they did, so that,
Yeah.
and we always tell them, if this happens again and you don't get a response, let us know,
Yeah.
we'll get right in there. and take
Thank
care
you.
of it.
Well, we're officially scheduled to go till 6:30, but I did want to, one last chance for questions or comments, and we'll follow up on some of the questions that were raised tonight and send out the information that you were requesting. We did have an announcement. Chief Sylvia Morgan, you probably have heard, is going to be retired August 31st. She's been on Urbana Police Department for 25 years. Yes.
That's right. Right.
And Deputy Chief Bryant Serafin will be named, I'm going to nominate him to be named interim chief, and Bob Fitzgerald interim deputy chief, and then we'll be doing a search. We'll also be doing a search for a new public works director this fall, and we're very close to naming our new fire chief. So we have 3 major chiefs, department heads retiring this year. It would be a big change in the city. Any quick reports from the neighborhood groups that we should be aware of? We'll just start down there. Megan.
Hi, John. Sorry, you just switched chairs. 11:13, 11:15. I'm so sorry, guys. 11:13, 11:15. I've just given up on 11:15. But 11:13, my only concern is that there are groups of kids that, they hang out with their buddies, they cut through there, and I think the kids might be getting in that property, so I'm a little worried about their safety.
So for the record, you're talking about 1113, 1115 West Hill.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
She said.
We'll check it out. If it's a vacant property, 1113, then we'll put a plaque, we'll notify the owner to register, and if they don't register, we'll give them a ticket, we'll go out and put a not approved for occupancy on
Okay,
there.
because it's been unoccupied for at least a year and a half.
Okay.
And, and they're starting to tear down the houses on Lincoln.
And
Hill.
1115 is owned by Gene Mannon, as you know, but it took us a while to get compliance across the street, but it's happening.
They're pouring the concrete right
So,
now for
yeah.
a new Habitat house right there.
Yeah, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's good to see.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Clyde?
Ask John a question about the Illinois water site down there. What are they doing with those houses that they have blocked up?
Well, every house that's inside the fence, they have a permit for demolition. They're going to demolish those homes, and then they're going to build, I think we've talked about this at our regular meeting, then they're going to build, I believe it's 168 townhouse units. They're all going to be rental property. They're going to improve that site, and that's what's going to go in there.
Well, the one house that's left on the corner, what happened to, she didn't get into that plan that they gonna demolish her house?
Is it the one that's for sale?
Yes.
Yeah, I think what happened was she called me and I connected her with the developer and gave them both contact information of each other, so if they weren't, the developer might not have been interested in that property, but, who knows what will happen eventually.
Okay.
Do you have a question, Keith?
From the Elnack neighborhood, I'll share the not as good first and then the good. Residents still report not feeling as safe as they would like, and with the gates perpetually open, anyone can drive in there that wants to, and so a lot of the problems are not necessarily caused by the residents there, but by people that come to visit those residents. I believe the police effectively caught the person that drove through the community garden and ran into the garage of someone so that was appreciated. The good news is that a partnership with the Urbana Parking District is doing well, and we're getting people that are knowing about the garden and glad for some things that most kids don't get to play or be exposed to, and so just a great partnership and picnics and trying to keep a sense of community with those that are still living there is going well because of that. And a lot of kids got backpacks and other things, school supplies, things that folks take for granted until they don't have them, and so kids being excited to go to school and having backpacks that they're proud of that don't look like hand-me-downs. So I would want to point out the positives as well as the negatives.
So with the Country Squire Edition Neighborhood Watch, we have block captains, and they have different people in their vicinity that they reach out to. If I don't have their email, we have phone numbers for a few people. So I've also got phone number or emails for people on some of the other neighborhood associations. So when I send out a email to everybody in my watch group, other neighborhood leads also get that, so that if there's crime going across the town, we kind of know patterns. So I think that's really beneficial. We do communicate with some of the information that I get. I've had people in the watch contact me when they've heard about something. Recently, there was a shooting on Country Squire, and someone heard about it from the other side of the neighborhood, wanted to know what that was about. They hadn't seen a crime report on it yet, and the resident didn't realize that there was a bullet that had gone through their house until the next morning and reported that. So I don't know if the perpetuator was caught or not, but I think they were. So the email thing has been really good. I also am on the Nextdoor app. So when I see things pop up on that, I let the Neighborhood Watch know about that way. Also with Facebook. So I'm using social media to integrate with emailing people on the watch to let them know not only about crime, but about things happening in Urbana that I think they'd be interested in too. So.
You probably saw in the paper, Giovanna Di Benedetto was big mastermind behind this wonderful neighborhood block party and carnival that was on Water Street. So that was a big, big plus. And I think it was really quite lovely that our state senator, Scott Bennett, he must have someone who clips a clipping service, because they clipped this out of the News Gazette and laminated and sent it to her. So she really needs all the, congratulations. They're well in order. It was a big success.
Ditto what Teresa said about Giovanna and her friends. They've done a great job. I also want to point out for those, some of you are new and may not know about this group, but the 2018 Regional Neighborhood Network Conference is coming up in October in Dayton, Ohio. And if you're interested in neighborhood activism, it's a wonderful thing to attend. So I did bring some information. I can show you where to find it online. Thanks.
And I'll just say Champaign will pay, well, they did last year. They paid our registration and provided bus service over to, we went to Indiana somewhere. So
Evansville.
Yeah, Evansville.
Yeah, two people would like an update on the rabbit fever issue. Do you know what rabbit?
Tularemia?
Yeah, that was, I guess, a lot in southwest Urbana. I don't know if it's
I had
exists
only
elsewhere.
read and I had only heard about 2 incidences. One was in a rabbit and one was in a cat. The person who you would probably want to contact would be the University of Illinois Vet Med, because they are taking most of those reports and doing, my understanding is, the autopsies on those animals. But it is highly recommended that you keep, now that there's been an increase in rabbits overall, the breeding rag rabbits, keep your cats inside, because it has killed a person 4 years ago who mowed over a rabbit, and he died from tularemia. So,
Yeah.
And a cat, it's in the paper, a cat died.
So the city doesn't have an update on rabbit fever.
I'm sorry. Also, if you find a dead rabbit or a dead cat in your yard, please contact, do not touch it yourself. Contact Public Health, and they will remove the animal and get it taken care
Well,
of.
another resident found a dead possum and called animal control and was frustrated that they had no answering machine. Just said that there was no one there, and so I gave her an alternate number, which is under animal control, which seems like the police number. But anyway, there's also been a spate of complaints about overgrowth of fauna and flora onto the sidewalks all over Urbana. Several people complained. And one woman sent a very lengthy recommendation on how to improve the complaint process, which I forwarded to Catherine for your.
If there are complaints about vegetation, that would go to our Jason Aerosmith in Public Works.
Yeah, but she points out a lot of things about problems with regard to how warnings are given and so forth and so on. I mean, you can read
Okay,
it because it's
okay,
over there.
thank you.
And, yeah, there was one other thing, but the moment I forgot it, so I guess that's it.
Well, before we close, I just wanted to share this painting. This was presented to me at the Water Street Carnival. It was done by Amy Stevens of Champaign, but I accepted on behalf of the city. It's going to hang in the mayor's office. And she painted this to represent strength of the community. And it was just a beautiful painting. She also wrote a community blessing, and I'll send it out to all of you because I think it was just beautiful. And, well, do you mind if I read it? All right, and then we'll close out that way. So this is the community blessing. May the strength of the community join together and rise up together. May each member of this community have one voice for the common good. May kindness and goodness envelop the area. No shame, only hope and peace. May love cover the community as a protective shield. Reach out to raise up. You are each worthy, valuable, significant. Your presence matters to the greater whole. May you be united in your collective interests to rise strong. Build a community of hope from within. You already possess all that you need to be a bright light. May you see how brilliant you already are. May you connect in differences and rise in unity. May the light of your goodness prevail over the darkness. Rise up and rise anew, remade, renewed. May each member of this community be a part of this tree, each part adding its strength. Strength of love, fueled by hope, deeply rooted to weather any storm, resilient. Offering the shaded relief from the brutal heat of life's trials. Despite all you may face, may you face it together. May you rise strong. And that's really the story of a lot of the neighborhoods that are represented here tonight and that we've all had the privilege of working in. So I'll send you out a copy and you can share it with your groups. Isn't this gorgeous? Okay, well, with no further business, I think this meeting is adjourned. The next meeting date, we meet every quarter, will November 28th. Okay.